Hi, I'm Ian Rees, and you're listening to Scottish Shindig with Andy Phillip on Radio GH.
The Scottish Shindig, the best in Scottish dance music and song.
Well, hello and a very warm welcome to the Scottish Shindig. It's Andy standing in for you this week for an hour of great music and song. And I know that some of you will still be in Perth or have been at Perth, and I hope you're ready for a wee hour's relaxation, whether just now live or catching up later on YouTube. But sit back and relax for the next hour and enjoy the music. And to get us off to a great start, none better than Bill Blackney's Scottish Dance Band with some 4/4 marches. So take your partners for the Gay Gordons. That was the great sound of Bill Black and his Scottish Dance Band from an album, a live recording at the well-renowned Stanley Cayley's, and that was from Volume 1. Well, I hope you've had a great week, and I hope you're enjoying some fine weather, whatever you're doing for the holiday weekend. And now that you're warmed up with a Gay Gordons there, we'll continue with a Dashing White Sergeant, this time from Graham Mitchell and his Scottish Dance Band from an album In Full Swing. Here we go. Great sound from Graham Mitchell and the Scottish Dance Band from an album in full swing. That was, of course, for the Dashing White Sergeant. Some great tunes in there. Well, I hope you're having a great time and lovely to see so many of you tuned in. And the next track, we'll have a wee song. I think last week I was at Haddington and Donald Todd was in fine song, as were the audience. So you can all join in or take a wee rest from the singing. But here's Jim McLeod and his band with Lonely Scapa Flow. I'll play this especially for Mary Kemp up in Orkney.
Do you recall, my dear, how once you walked with me across the warm brown hills towards the shining sea, and how we lingered long upon the shore to see beloved ships come sailing up the flow? But that was yesterday, for now they come no more among the small green isles whereof they lay of yore. And so we linger sadly by an empty shore and shed a tear for lonely Scapa Flow. We watched them anchor proudly as the sun went down, and heard a lonesome bugle from the old renown, and o'er the gleaming water, like a brand new town, 10,000 port lights winked in Scapa Flow. But that was yesterday, for now they come no more among the small green isles whereof they lay of yore. And so we linger sadly by an empty shore and shed a tear for lonely Scapa Flow. Then for a while we watch not on that darkened shore, no winking port lights then to glint the wave-tops o'er. For there were those who came and will return no more, who are asleep in lonely Scapa Flow. But that was yesterday, for now they come no more among the small green isles whereof they lay of yore. And so we linger sadly by an empty shore and shed a tear for lonely Scapa Flow. And so we linger sadly by an empty shore and shed a tear for lonely Scapa Flow.
The unmistakable sound of Jim McLeod and his band with Lonely Scapa Flow. Jim, of course, and his band were resident for many years at the Dunblane Hydro, and very popular they were too, rightly so. Well, time for a evergreen popular. Here is Michael Garvin from his album The Day After Tomorrow with The Crack at Clashmore Hall. Well, great sound from Michael Gavin from an album The Day After Tomorrow. That was a medley starting, of course, with the crack at Clashmore Hall. Well, on Tuesday, I had the privilege of hearing Michael Phillip and his band at Mauchline Club, and what a performance they put on with great music and song and some crack as well. And one of the highlights in the first half for me was the Whistling Ferryman, of course, Michael's very own composition. And here it is for you from his album of the same name, The Whistling Ferryman. Here's Michael along with Paul Clancy to play his great composition, The Whistling Ferryman. Fantastic tune that is, Whistling Ferryman by Michael Phillip, and played there by Michael and Paul Clancy from an album of the same name. Fantastic piece of music. Well, we'll lift the tempo a wee bit and we head to Seamus O'Sullivan, who presents the Touch of Irish show on a Wednesday at 6 o'clock. Seamus, brilliant accordionist, and here again from the Stanley Ceilidh is Seamus playing a medley. Get your feet tapping. Great set from Seamus there, Seamus O'Sullivan from the Stanley Cayley. And if your knees weren't bouncing, your feet weren't tapping, you better check your headphones were on. Well, we'll slow it down a wee bit, and this time we go to Lindsay Weir and her Scottish dance band from an album Step in Style. Here they are with a modern waltz, which you'll recognise as the theme tune, and I'll give you a wee clue. There's the band settling its prime and there's no misses here. Here's Lindsay Weir and her Scottish dance band with a modern waltz. Lovely arrangement of Jean, which, as many of you will remember, was the theme tune to the prime of Miss Jean Brodie, a favourite programme of many before my time, of course. But that was Lindsay Weir and her Scottish dance band from the album Step in Style. Now, earlier in the week, we're very saddened to hear the news of John Leslie passing. John was an accordion player and an accordion teacher, taught many players and was known to many, and Ewan posted a very nice tribute to him on his page the other day there, and I thought it would be fitting to play a track from Ewan's Perfect Timing album, and John plays second box on your Harmony accordion. So here they are with a Flirtation two-step. That was Ewan Galloway and the band on Tuesday night playing a wee tribute to John Leslie, who he learnt that tune under and played it along with him and thoroughly enjoyed that time of his life. That was a tune called Luce e Ombre. And before that we had a Flirtation two-step from the album Perfect Timing, where John played second box along with Ewan and the band. So from everyone at Radio GH, we extend our sympathies and condolences to Scott, all the family and all the friends of John. Well, next time for a band dance, and here is Ian Hudson and his Scottish dance band with Such a Thing as a Band Dance from the album Dashing White Sergeant. Ian Hudson and his Scottish dance band from an album Dashing White Sergeant. That was of course a band dance. Well, time for something a little different, and I've played this band before, some young ladies from Orkney I believe, from an album called Cross the Line. This is Farah with a track called Cheeky Vimpto, and I'll play this for Danny Inch. I know you're a fan of Farah, Danny. I hope you enjoy this one. I hope everyone else enjoys it as well, but I'm sure you will. Great playing and a lively sound from Farah. Very talented band. If you see them advertised, go and hear them. Fantastic sound. That was a track called Cheeky Vimto. For those in the know, there's nothing better than a Cheeky Vimto. And hello to everyone across in Rhode Island. I know Elizabeth would enjoy that one, given the fiddles there. And also a potential new listener in Rhode Island, Sarah, who was over visiting Scotland, sampling the whisky, doing a wee tour and catching up with family. And is also over in Rhode Island. Next track comes from Graham Geddes and his Scottish dance band from a live recording at the Beach Ballroom, and here they are with a Boston two-step. Graham Geddes and his Scottish dance band from an album live at the Beach Ballroom, and the track is titled A Boston Two-Step. I think it's more a Gay Gordon's, but not being a dancer, I'm sure you'll correct me in the comments. Incidentally, I'm having difficulty seeing the messages. I can see numbers of who's tuned in and where, but I can't see the messages. So I hope you're having great chat. The next track comes from Peter Morrison, an album he did with Alistair MacDonald called The Songs of Scotland, and here he is with the Eriskay Love Song. So sing along.
Hear me, guidance by night, strength and light thou'rt to me. Hear me, hear me, hear me, sad am I without
Lovely vocal from Peter Morrison and Alistair MacDonald from an album, Songs of Scotland. That was, of course, the Eriskay Love Song. And we'll carry on with a track from Brandon McPhee from the album Scottish Champion. Here he is with a track called Anne's Real Set.
Anne's
Randy McPhee with a set called Anne's Real Set, from one champion to another, and still a champion of the music to this day. I believe still playing every day on Facebook. Here is John Carmichael with his band from the album Dance Time with a Highland Scottish. Well, what a terrific sound from John Carmichael and the Scottish dance band from an album called Dance Time. That was, of course, a Highland Scottish. Well, sadly, that brings us to the end of the programme. I hope you've enjoyed the mixture this week, and I hope you have a great remainder of your holiday weekend or holiday week, however it works out. And Ewan will be back with you next week. So, I'll leave you in the very capable hands of Gordon Gunn from an album called Wick to Wickham. This is a great track called Osmosis Real. So until the next time, take care of yourselves and all the very best. Take care. Here's Gordon with the Osmosis Real. Thanks for your company, folks, and all the best till the next time. Cheerio.